Welcome to In Front of Ira.
We're Sabrina.
And Torsten.
Two historians.
And friends.
And lovers.
Of romantic comedies.
And this is the podcast in which we answer the age-old question.
Will they or won't they?
Is it or isn't it a romantic comedy?
Technically, that's two questions.
I will do this with you right now because we're already here and we're already recording this.
Your journey has taken you to defeat and giving up.
Yeah, all right. Yeah, I have given up joyously. I have. Anyway, yeah.
I'm sorry. I saw a reel of Windows 95 man doing the freestyler video. Like,
oh my god! Yeah, Bumfuck MCs. Oh. No, it's from 2000. I know this very well.
It's so funny. It's so funny because he basically like recreates it, but in like a bad camera work kind of way, and him being just kind of not very cool but annoying. It's really funny. Anyway,
this is not about Windows 95 man. It should be though. It should
That's
be.
That's the person I want to see in a rom-com.
The Windows 95 man from Eurovision. Anyway, this episode is about a Red, White, Royal Blue from 2023, and which, is one of the only queer examples the genre has given us. So, let's talk about that. It's also one of the other most recent films we are discussing.
Starring,
once again, Nicholas
Galitzine.
I'm gonna go with Galitzine.
Nicholas Galitzine.
I'm committing to Galitzine now. And Taylor Zakar Perez. And it is based on a book by Casey McQuiston that was also very successful. It is not really the plot of like famous person falls for not famous person. In this case, they're both famous. Which has similar hurdles than the other genre, but like sort of the double whammy of that, or the triple whammy because they're also gay. And it is about the sort of first son of the United States. Taylor Zakar Perez is Alex Claremont Diaz, the son of the current sitting president of the United States, played by Uma Thurman. And
Ellen Claremont.
And the prince, one of the princes of the British royal family, Henry.
I think he's the Prince of Wales. I think he's the next to the throne.
He would. I think he's in line for the throne. And I know he's not the next one because there's a king played by Stephen Fry, which we have to talk about. But and the prince that gets married, the sort of the key meet cute, no, not really meet cute, but the key event that sets off the plot is the wedding of his older brother, who would be in line for the throne.
Why does it says in the materials that he's the Prince of Wales? I guess that's just wrong then.
I mean, he's one of the princes. I mean, I don't know how that works.
How many princes does Wales need?
I mean, they're all the princes. I mean, right? They're all the British.
Right, but he's referred to as the.
But
Prince
he's the
of
hairy.
Wales.
He's the spare. He's
the hairy. Yeah, he's hairy. Okay, so we have not Harry Styles. Now we have not Harry Spare.
Not Prince Harry. Yeah. But because also there's like a plot point, I think, or it's sort of in the bonus content where at some point he's just sort of steps out of the whole thing and doesn't want to be actually in. So it's sort of the Harry thing, which is not part of the main plot anymore of the book.
All right.
Like,
so the main plot is those two meet at that wedding and have...
No, they've met before.
Well, they've met before, but they kind of like meet again.
They don't like each other. So this is the important part about this is enemies to lovers, because they do dislike each other. based on the fact that Henry was rude to him once. I mean, the thing is, he's just like really into him and doesn't want to deal with that. But like, it is ostensibly enemies to lovers, and he sort of hates it.
And it is. I mean, it is the trope. But,
it is the trope.
But they're never really enemies, and they're not enemies for very long. Like it's barely enemies.
Yeah, and in the book, it's also barely enemies. It's sort of set up that obviously sort of this similar age. They're both like teenagers who grow up in this almost sort of like what is the US version of the royal family, but like he has a chip on his shoulder because he was a working class kid in Texas of all places. His father is Latino. It's like, it's a whole thing obviously for him to suddenly be like wealthy and be in the White House. And he also wants a political career of his own, or at least like is very invested in the political world. And then obviously it sort of sneers at this like, you know, rich from birth, royal from birth, Henry, who he thinks is like a boring, stuck-up guy. And this is also obviously before they know of each other that they're both queer, which is, you know, because obviously neither of them are out. So it is sort of the enemies to lovers in that especially Alex like sort of sneers at him and is like, what are you doing? And they had a run-in at some event where Henry was very snobby
like
towards him.
World saving climate conference thing where for some reason they're both there.
Yeah, in the book I forgot what it is, if it's the same kind of event, but like it is sort of off screen. It's also like not described in detail in the book, but there was an incident where he thought he was like really snobby and standoffish and he didn't like him based on that. But then they go to the royal wedding, so Henry's brother gets married, and obviously because like they get invited, and then Alex gets, I mean, I don't know how clear it is in the book, but in the film, but he's sort of tipsy, he's drunk, and then starts an argument with him, and they end up falling into this massive cake.
Into the massive cake, which reminded me, do you know this? I think it was like an SNL bit of the champagne pyramid.
Oh no!
Do you vaguely? It's like the whole bit is basically like this person who is very rich and is having this elaborate party has built up this champagne pyramid, and it's very clear that in the end the champagne pyramid is going to fall. But he's very protective of the champagne pyramid, and nobody can come close to the champagne pyramid. And at some point, I think throws a woman out of the window because she like comes too close to the champagne pyramid, and just kind of like, and the joke in the end is that he himself trashes the champagne pyramid and then jumps out of the window. It is completely, but it reminded me of that because it was the same kind of stuck up situation where you're doing something that ostensibly sucks because the stuff is expensive and people were going to eat that, but it really doesn't hurt anyone, but it becomes like a huge deal.
Yeah, it becomes obviously a huge press deal because it's like, oh, they hate each other. Is this going to cause an international incident? I mean, it's a bit drawn, like, it's overdrawn. I don't think it would be that much of a deal, but obviously for tabloids, it would be a deal. Also in the book, they make clear that this massive cake somehow cost £75,000. So it's like, okay, we need to like fix this. We need to fix the PR because also
we need to fix this. Although, like, this is my first issue. Like my I have like two issues with this movie. One of the most major issues is the whole like making the royal family like. Making me care about the British royal family that's a strike on you. You're going to have to dig yourself up from that. And the fact that there's a 75,000 like pound cake, okay, I get it. That's the kind of way that these things go. But that's not the most expensive thing about this million pound wedding. Like the fact that the cake costs £75,000 shouldn't really matter.
The book goes to great length of making sure that we know that Henry is actually not fond of the fact that he's in this lineage and it sort of abdicates like, you know, Harry. And also is like very critical of the colonialism. His, like, you know, it is that stupid thing of like, we want to do the fairy tale prince romance, but also want to put it in a context where we know people are critical of colonialism. And crucially, the love interest would be very critical because he's a Latino from the United States. But he also, I mean, he also gets to take a jab, obviously, at like, Henry also gets a jab at like, US politics, because I mean, sorry, but the US president, like, no government ever, even a Democrat like Uma Thurman, like we know what like Hillary is doing.
And,
like,
yeah,
you
and
know,
this is, again, it's not just the royal family. It's the fact that I think it's the, like, you need them to be attached to these high voltage, high power families in order for this fairy tale romance thing to work. But you're also setting it in clearly a time and clearly a world in which you're aware of all the problems that go with that. And you kind of lampshade the problems, but they don't go away. And for me, that felt uncomfortable throughout. That was kind of like my hardest, like the hardest. I
honestly just stopped caring because it's gay and it's cute and it's horny, and then I can sidestep all of that. I'd struggle way more if this was a straight romance. I'm just gonna put it out there simply because there are so little gay ones, especially for this kind of genre where it's sort of silly and it's sort of fairy tale like and it's sort of high stakes, and you know, it's you know, it's fine. And I mean, they do with the issue of like coming out in this setting as well, and obviously they're turning it into the fairy tale version of where it does work out for them. But that's also fine. Like sometimes you just want to watch that happening.
And speaking of that, the world that this is set in is very reminiscent of like the Sorkin verse, right? Of this West Wing. We are, you know, we know and understand the problems of the world, but in the end, we're all just people trying to make things better. And it felt really strongly. It felt like at some point, I think I was like texting you and was saying like this is giving kind of like Dave YA version. And it's not that. And I found out that the director, Matthew Lopez, worked as a consultant or as a writer on The Newsroom. And all of a sudden, I'm like, okay, it's not just implied; it's pretty direct.
So actually, the writer director is Matthew Lopez, and the interesting thing, like, I only just when I started like looking this up for the podcast, didn't realize how much stuff he had done, especially on stage. And he wrote The Inheritance, which is sort of the 21st century Angels in America epos about the HIV/AIDS crisis. So, you know, I mean,
he's very accomplished. Yeah,
he's very accomplished, and I think also just the fact, and I mean, this is one of also just looking at the films we've looked at, but also, I mean, obviously, speaking of the whole industry, but also within the genre, like, I don't think we've had a rom-com ever by a gay Latino writer director, and for that alone, you know, and I think, and I mean, it's a silly fairy tale romance kind of film, but it is also something, right? I mean, one of the, like, we don't need to like immediately talk about reviews, but like one of the reviews also pointed this out. It's like, usually if there's a gay romance film of any kind coming out, it always has to be like important politically, and then it sets like a bar, and then all the next films have to emulate that. And in a way, Red, White, Royal, Blue works because it's just not trying to do that. It's not like, you know, the book also has more like sort of background of like political implications of like being, you know, gay and Latino in US politics. And I think the film is actually sidestepping that. And maybe that's just, you know, fine, because that's not the genre we're in. Again, it's like this sort of, it's obviously this utopian. This is like Uma Thurman is president instead of Donald Trump. You know, like, that alone makes it political, but in a way of like, okay, we're buying into this fantasy where it's just a wholeheartedly better world.
It felt
right?
It felt very 90s in that way, right? Because you always have these, like, you could still believe that, you know, Bill Clinton wasn't as Bill Clinton as he turned out to be for a while in the 90s, and then you kind of had presidents reflect that, right? This is the 90s when we start getting, you know, the Morgan Freemans as president who are all wise, and we're getting Martin Sheen in the West Wing,
and I mean,
and that's what this picks up on.
And I'm very sure a gay Latino from the US is very aware of all the problems the United States has, but still was like, I'm going to make the silly movie about horny gay people. And it's like, okay, because he's also made very serious things about horny gay people too. And I mean, the book, Casey McQuiston is a queer writer. They're almost Gen Z. They're like born in 1994. So it's like, you know, it's sort of this clash of like, it's like old Gen Z, I don't know, but like, you know, but probably clearly still grew up with, or like, you know, West Wing type things. And like, and yeah, we're just gonna buy into this queer utopia now and let's go. Like, that's sort of, I think, the vibe that they're trying to do. And for me, it at least works because they're also just, you know, doing this. It literally starts with them falling into a giant wedding cake.
Yeah, which also kind of to me, starting off, because I also thought about genre here, and like that scene kind of just cements the romantic comedy-ness of it. It's physical comedy. It is very obvious. It is actually very funny, which, you know, there's many, and the bar is kind of high. You know, there's many falling into things scenes, and a lot of them feature Hugh Grant, so you have to be good. and they do pull it off. It's
but again,
it's
Nicholas Galitzine, like, he should probably just be the new Hugh Grant.
He should, although I have to say, like, since we also watched The Idea of You, I liked him more in The Idea of You. I think he's too convincingly stuck up British stiff upper lippy here.
But I do like, there's some when they get sort of, I mean, okay, they do snark at each other a lot, and they're both good at that. And the book is also very explicit about them just being snarky. And like, one of the jokes, again, it is very political, that is not in the film, where it's like, you know, I don't know, when they're being mean to each other via text, and it's something like, what, are you going to have me waterboarded? And it's like, I'm sure your government could arrange for that. It's like, okay, touche. But anyway, it's also, they're good at that. But there's also the scene where I forget what event they're at that time, but where they make out somewhere and then get interrupted by like his sort of bodyguard, like Sarah Shahi,
who is kind of like the MVP in the second row of this movie. Like, like all props to Uma Thurman.
But then when they pretend to not have just made out, it is so funny, and especially like Galitzine is really funny because he's like, he has that look on his face, like, which in a podcast is, but you just need to look at it even if you're not gonna watch the whole film. But he's like sort of fake pretending to arrange books on a shelf, and it's like very Hugh Grant in For Weddings when he's like trying to hide from the other, like, it's, but yeah,
it wears its inspiration on its sleeves. Although so the thing that I have to say, like, the kind of standout for me was actually Tyler Zakar Perez. I don't know how many names we have to say.
Like, no,
he is kind of the most compelling character in this, and it's there's just something about
it's
him.
Also the point of view of his in the book, so
I mean, he is the point of view character. I guess that does make sense, which also is a better choice than making the point of view character the British prince, because then you just get this kind of, oh, I'm a poor little rich boy. Not that he isn't that, but obviously.
No, again, there's more a backstory of like DC politics and being Latino and having a working class back. So that's much more in the book as well. And no, he's really great. Like, they're both really good actually, and they have chemistry with each other, and they can do comedy and they can do more serious stuff, and that just works. They're very well cast.
The one thing that didn't quite work, but that might have something to do with the book. Like, how old are they supposed to be? Because I feel like they behave like they're much younger. Because Galitzine is, as we've established, 29, and Perez is like 32, and he kind of looks it. Like, he does very much have this.
It's the usual problem.
Yeah.
So they're both, I mean, they like early 20s, I think, supposed to be. They're not quite teenagers
I buy it for
anymore.
Galitzine. For Perez, I kept thinking he's I keep thinking that he should be in charge of things. Like he looks he looks in a suit.
This
like
is
he
also
should be,
where the book is putting him already. Like he's young, but he's very driven. He wants to have a political career. It's also that sort of like having to age too quickly because you're suddenly in the White House. But he also wants a political career. He works with political players. So, in the film, they also put him in like, okay, do campaigning for me in Texas. But the book also does that. And which is,
but that's a different to me. It feels different if that's something that you get to do when you're early 20s versus you're in your and he does, and it's really not like how old he's supposed to be, but how old he really looks. And he has this Cary Grantness about him, which I find incredibly compelling, but also in a kind of Cary Grant movie being Cary Grant's age in a Cary Grant movie kind of way. So that did take me out of it at times, just because it's really hard for me to buy him as young as Galitzine, who is slightly younger but looks a lot younger.
Yeah, that's the thing. I think in that regard, it also makes sense that like in the film we get the idea that he knows of himself that he's bisexual already when he starts his relationship with Henry. Like he sort of, obviously it's more the thing of like, well, how we're going to handle this relationship because you're a prince.
Does he know?
Whatever.
I wasn't sure about that.
No, in the film it feels like more clearly established. He's definitely less struggling with it than in the book, where in the book he really starts to figure that out for himself.
Okay, because it felt to me like he was figuring it out in the movie as well.
Yeah, but it is less prominent, and it takes him less longer to get to the point of like coming out as bi to various people. It's the thing that's also missing in the film is that in the book there's a much stronger sense. There's much more secondary characters, which is usually something film cuts down, but it loses something because in the film, in the book, there's the so-called White House trio, which is him, his sister, and the sister is, I don't think, no longer in the book at all, and then this other friend, Nora, and that friend is in the film, but barely. So he has like this support network of like same age.
Vaguely remember that, yeah.
Yeah, and it's like they're not really in the film. Like it's just not there. But like you have so many conversations between him and his sister and his friends, and sort of that sense of like a larger family. Also, his parents are divorced in the book. In the film, we barely get that sense. His father is definitely there. The conversation they have is also in the book because his father is obviously still in his life there, but it's like, that's another like tension. And whereas Henry has a sister he's close with. We see less of her because the point of view of the book, but that's a bit in the film. But like, especially like Alex's sort of support network is very cut down to essentially his mom.
Yeah, which also leads to that very strange scene of him coming out with Uma Thurman, which isn't strange, and you know why it needs to be there. This is clearly kind of young adult, and it's also it's an important scene emotionally. It's also clearly there because the filmmakers want young people to be responsible. Yeah. So I get why it's there. It just
put a bit of sex ed into this, and I'm okay. This is cool. Let's talk about this.
Yeah.
But also, it's there to educate you, which is fine.
But also, it feels weird because he, like, him being very obviously in his 30s, like, it just feels a little off.
That is sort of
that
the
is
thing
the one
of, like,
scene where I was like,
he looks too old for that
maybe you
talk.
needed to change that. Yeah, he looks too old for the talk. That's basically it.
Yeah, his character is not. So that's the sort of tension. Other than that, like, I do appreciate the movie for, like, definitely being a rom-com. There is sort of that fast-paced humor. I do also appreciate in this case, so versus the idea of you we covered in the other episode, in this case, the film is actually racier than the book. And I do appreciate that. That might also work because, they are snarky with each other, but like in terms of more explicit sex scenes, I think the film is doing a very good job of like putting them in without, cutting away at the right time, but also not cutting away way too early that a lot of these films tend to do. And the film is actually R-rated.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense. Yeah, I can see that.
I mean, I can see that, but also double standards, because if we had these kinds of sex scenes with the level of explicitness they actually are, because they're very good at like not really showing you things while also showing you things, I'm not entirely sure a straight movie would have gotten an R rating for that.
That's
which is
a good question, but
constant point of contention with the rating system that is super homophobic. It is just true. You can get a gay kiss into a movie and get an R rating. So I'm not surprised it is. But at least like, hey, that doesn't happen, especially not for like
I'm just wondering about ratings and standards, because clearly in the idea of You, they were trying very, very clearly to avoid this, and they went very much into that direction. So
yeah, and I mean that's cool, because like, come on, let them fuck, please. It's 2024, and I mean that doesn't happen with gay men. The first gay sex scene in a mainstream movie was in Rocket Man from 2019, 2018, believe it or not.
Wait, so no, like, what do you mean by gay sex scene? Because like the whole, like, what is it? Jake Gyllenhaal goes up a mountain movie. Wasn't that was
Brokeback? Like, yeah. Like, I mean, for Brokeback, there was something that was first happening with Rocket Man where it was like, oh my God.
I always my question with these kind of firsts and like is always, I wonder what kind of like the definition is, because it
or
really,
like a major studio release. I forgot what the production company for Brokeback was, but it's still ridiculously rare. Like, and that's the point. And I mean, for the fact that this is a YA novel adaptation, I mean, it is also the fan fiction thing, right? Because obviously all of this has a very clear air of fan fiction. I'm still not sure if it was confirmed that it was one, but the way the book is written is very in that style as well. And so you have certain expectations in terms of the smut level. But did you like, I mean, also age-wise, and they have this romance, they should be like horny and they should be stupid about it. And that's fine. And there's also, again, where humor comes from, that scene where they make out and then Sarah Shahi's character comes in and I'm rearranging books on the shelf, that kind of thing. And it's just, you know.
Yeah. That's why she was really, because on the one hand, she doesn't have a very super prominent role in this, but she is there for some key moments, and she does definitely bring it.
And then also when he's hiding in his closet in the hotel room and she finds him and she's like, oh my fucking God. It's like, do you have a girl in here? And it's like, no, I have the Prince of Wales in here, basically. And then when he's still half in the closet and they're having that conversation, and that's just like, those are just moments you get if you have that kind of setup. And that's where a lot of the humor does come from. So yeah, I do appreciate that about that film, because that also makes it sort of the like more enjoyable watch of like, maybe you don't want to think about things for the next 2 hours. Yeah. Which is what the genre is usually supposed to do. And then a lot of times either the writing is so bad that you're not enjoying yourself for the next 90 to 120 minutes, or it actually gets at some existential questions after all. No, you just let them be silly sometimes and be idiots about things. And I mean, the movie also has a bit more serious moments. It also has genuinely romantic moments, like in the Victoria and Albert Museum, when they're there at night. Apparently now current contemporary gay movies all have to have a scene in a museum after hours, because there's Dan Levy did I think we mentioned this before, but Dan Levy did like a drama film for Netflix, and that also has a gay scene in a museum where nobody's in there. And there was something else I'm forgetting, but I do appreciate them.
Go museums.
Go gay people in museums. I mean, it makes for a really nice backdrop, like cinematography wise. You don't have to do much as a set designer. You just like need to figure out how to shoot them with the sculptures and all of that. I mean,
it's in nice. When Harry Met Sally, like the museum scene. Yeah,
museum scene. Classic. It is a whole thing. Which was funny because I had like a social media discussion with like some queer colleagues who like do museum public history stuff, and they were so offended at the idea that they were super offended at the idea that he would like have private access to the Victoria and Albert Museum. I'm like, he's a prince. A, probably yes. B, all these museums constantly rent out spaces for private occasions. Get off your high horse about this being some kind of public space, especially the Victoria and Albert Museum in England. Like, what are you talking about?
Is it realistic? Who knows?
No,
does it work for the movie? Yeah.
Yes.
I mean, we have a movie in which they fall into a cake. I mean...
Yeah.
Yeah.
And again, it's just a really nice backdrop. And it's also that... I think what museums do as a space is immediately sort of this, like, either as arts, but if in this case it's also sort of... there's a history to things. And I think putting two gay men in the context of, like, these sculptures that are quite often... actually pretty gay, like Greek and Roman art from a certain period of time gives you an immediate sort of pomp and context and them existing in a longer history, which is obviously some of their problems, right? He comes from a lineage of the royal family. He can't be gay. Whereas we all know royals have been gay in the past and are gay in the present, but like the closeted aspect of it, and it's like that thing... which makes it even funnier that his grandfather, the king, is Stephen Fry. But
I mean, yeah, it felt a little bit stunt casting, but also like Stephen Fry would absolutely do a film like that. Yeah, that makes sense.
No, it was definitely also stunt casting. I think that's why they changed the gender, because in the book, and I mean also because Elizabeth was still queen when Case McQuiston would have written the book, and she was queen for like 100 million years. But it is a queen in the book. But I kind of do like the stunt casting aspect of like one of England's oldest gays. It was a toss up between Stephen Fry and Sir Ian, and it was more likely for Stephen Fry to jump at the chance to do this.
And the comedy, I mean, yeah.
And I mean, it gives you the interpretation that maybe the king is supportive, but like just cautioning about the outing because he might have been closeted himself. I think that gives it sort of a dimension that you immediately have. If you cast
I'm honestly, I wasn't entirely sure what to make of the scene with the king, because it seems to kind of internally within the scene change in terms of what it supposes that he is doing and he is thinking, because he kind of comes in saying like, oh no, we'll just basically like make all of this go away, and then he ends up being not like full-throated supportive, but ends up being okay with it. And I'm not sure if it's a pacing thing or the way that it was set up, but that felt a little jarring.
I mean, I think it does work if you read him as like, I'm closeted myself and you're a different generation. And my first knee-jerk thing is, we don't speak about this. The royal family doesn't speak about this. We know it exists, but we just pretend it doesn't. And then maybe seeing like these young kids together and thinking maybe the world is changing, because then that's also the implication of like, oh, the public has come out and support us in like droves. And it's like, well, be careful what you wish for. Do you really want this? Do you really want to be out together? And then they make that choice. Which obviously in this generation would have been completely unspeakable. But you actually only get that through that stunt casting. Like that to be able to read that as such is only possible if it's Stephen Fry, I think. If it had been a queen, you wouldn't think, have been someone vaguely looking like Queen Elizabeth, that reading wouldn't work at all. So I do wonder if that's like an intentional reading we're supposed to get simply from Stephen Fry. And also my favorite line when he's like, homosexual. Like that like very British aristocratic pronunciation. But anyway.
Yeah, nobody does RP anymore except Stephen Fry as the king. Yeah. It is like to kind of like just kind of backtrack in terms of how that story unfolds, which I think helps us understand the rom-cominess of it, because it does have, which we keep coming back to, like the longer time frame, because they actually did meet before, and so like actually most of the, as we said, enemies to lovers trope, which is implied and which really it starts off as doesn't really happen in the movie, but is supposedly happens earlier, and then we get this kind of international incident with the cake, which they need to do PR on, and so they kind of come together and have to pretend that they've been best friends for the longest time. So
it's also fake. It's not quite fake dating, but it's fake friends. So it's another trope. So again, fan fiction tropes galore.
Which I think I'm a little right. The reason that we call them tropes in fan fiction is because that's where they were pointed out, right? People obviously point them out, and you kind of like pick your fan fiction by like, oh, this trope, I like this trope, I would like to see this. That's been in media forever,
of
right?
Course,
these kinds of things.
But it's more the writing towards the trope rather than you write something and it falls into a certain category and then later gets categorized within that. That is sort of the hen and egg thing of fan fiction is we have these tropes now, but we specifically write fic for a certain set of tropes. And then now romance novels work marketing wise through tropes more than anything, and
which is in part the same thing of writing becoming organized in all these books of how to write a novel and what you need to set up in the first act and all that kind of stuff. So it's part of writing becoming much more, on the one hand, democratized, but also standardized.
Also the market, and the TikTok, book talk kind of market is very, very adjacent to AO3 and fan fiction writing, because that's what a lot of these kids come up with, and then they want to read books that are like this and have this kind of logic. And now we've reached because of this, have reached a point where they're like, why are there no trigger warnings in my books? And it's this is not how literature used to work, but this is how fan fiction works.
Yeah.
So,
but that's so my question is that a trope that they're specifically writing to, or is this just something that the author needed for the story to work and it happens to be the trope? Because I don't think that's so clear here.
I think given Casey McChristen's background and their age, I'm sure they were writing towards fan fiction tropes. And there is that current, I'm not sure if they ever confirmed that, but that it was a fan fiction story before that was fan fiction based on Andrew Garfield and what's his face, Jesse Eisenberg, and connected to the film The Social Network, which would confirm your Aaron Sorkin theory, by the way. But I don't know if that's been confirmed or not. But in any case, it certainly exists within this context. But anyway, they pretend to be friends, and then they start actually texting each other and having to hang out, and then actually get to know each other better and realize, oh, you're not the asshole I thought you were. I do actually like you, and you're way cooler than I thought, and also I'm attracted to you, and which I misplaced because I didn't think I was queer, etc., or
The texting, I thought, was actually really well done, because texting, it's not the mostest realistic texting, but it felt true to life. The fact that they do it a lot, when they're not in the same place, the fact that it is such a huge part of the life of some 20-somethings, I think, in comparison to what we discussed in our last episode on the idea of you, where social media seems to not function the way it does in the real world, the texting here seemed very much like it functions the way it does in the real world. And I really like that part.
Big part of the book that they sort of start texting and then text almost all day, every day. And they have that 5-hour time difference, but it sort of disappears because they're both people who stay up very long, usually working long hours or have insomnia, which is a plot point. So that makes it easier. And what I do like about the visualization, because that is the point that we also talked about with the idea of of course, texting and all of that is less interesting visually, but then you find ways to make it interesting. And the way they're doing that is when the turkeys, with the pardoning of the turkeys, which is also seen in the book, when he's in the room and then calls him and it's on speakerphone, and then they put the actors in the same bed, even though we know they're just talking to each other, but it's really cool visually, and it evokes that feeling of you're actually in the same room, because you're having this late night intimate phone conversation, and it feels like you're together, even though you're physically not. And everyone gets that. It is a great visual choice. You have the actors being able to be in the same scene. You don't always have to do split screening, which you can do, which is also a romance tool, right? Anyway, or rom-com tool as well. Like When Harry Met Sally,
When
all the
Harry
phone
Met Sally,
conversation.
very classic. Yeah, that's what it reminded me of, actually.
I do like the choice of briefly, like not for the whole conversation, but for like when the phone conversation gets more intimate, putting them in the same bed. And I think that is a really cool directorial like choice.
It's not clunky. I think that's the most important thing about it, because in most films, when they do something like this, you have to make it work really well for it not to come across as pretty clunky. Because some movies, you still go like, oh, wait, are we in a different time? Is this supposed to be, you know, like a flashback scene? Like, you're always wondering if they're not super like hit you on the head with it, like this is now in black and white, which denotes that it's the past. They're doing that in a very natural way that flows with the movie, which I find usually is hard to do. So it feels like this is kind of a movie where people can learn from how to integrate social media and texting into a movie without it seeming like it's a separate thing, and making clear that this is a huge part of people's lives.
Yeah, and is also a way of having intimate conversation, which is true for most of us now. And I feel like even if you're older, Gen X or like boomer, you don't understand. And then filmmakers, when they're older, don't understand that this is actually possible. It's a generational bias because they don't use social media the same way. They understand it for phones, but even the fact that, like, sometimes people do speak on the phone like this, especially if they're like dating or sort of starting to date and they're long distance and they might use phone too. But they also text, and they text all day, and they text while they do other things. And that's actually really important to build a friendship, but also a romantic relationship with someone. And it feels like that's glossed over. And in the idea of the people who were writing this were too old. Is a truth to it of like not getting, but you have a 20-year-old protagonist. He would also like, for him, texting is the natural thing to do. Like,
and it's really, I think the dividing line there is people who grew up writing texts to their friend, and not just texts in terms of like short message service texts, but like instant messenger and stuff like that. So things that came up in the 90s. So you can tell when filmmakers either were not part of that early internet and are that age, or if they're just too old to have done that. It's very obvious.
Ironically, obviously, we have You've Got Mail, which works with AOL, but it starts with emailing each other, which is very close to writing each other letters, and then transitions into.
And it's also a movie specifically about that, right?
About
it's not
also that
integrated,
change, and it's not the same integrated. And I think like Crazy Rich Asians, which is something we should do, does use texting, and it does use gossiping online in really fun ways. And not the whole movie, but like to set it off, and it speaks to a certain culture within Malaysia as well. But like that is also something I was missing from The Idea of You, and I feel like that Red, White, Royal, Blue is making better on the level of the intimate thing.
It's just interesting in terms of, right, how realistic do we need? And we talked about how this movie is a fantasy and lives in its own queer utopia, which is not a perfect utopia, but it's still definitely not the real. It's like a Sorkinian utopia where there are problems.
It's a Sorkinian where there's now Donald Trump, and where there's
and a lot of times the question that I have of movies generally is like, where are the lines in terms of this we accept as realistic because these other choices have been made, versus this we cannot accept as realistic because they haven't been made. And there's a lot of television, especially kind of like television made by and for older people, like kind of like your network TV things, where it just lives in a world where social media and texting and just like this kind of relating to each other outside of phone calls and actual conversations in the room is not a huge part of people's lives, which sometimes I get because, again, visuals hard to do well. We need to kind of develop a whole visual language around that, which started with things like You've Got Mail, but certainly hasn't finished as a trope, as a way of doing that. It's often not done very well, and it's always it's always heartening when kind of a younger generation of filmmakers integrates these things, which are much more true to the emotional truth of our lives. Of course, you're not going to be the son of the president. Of course, you're not going to be a prince, but you can relate to these people through that thing.
I think this is oddly where the fact that Apple is now producing things and people are forced to put iPhones on screen is actually helping. Like
which then takes you out of it because weird. You're like, does every single person have an iPhone
and nobody uses screen protectors and none of them have cracked screens. But I feel like that's oddly like where sometimes they put more of these things in and you just need to still make it realistic, which then doesn't happen if it's product placement. But
I remember there was a time in like the 2010s, I think, when I think Microsoft was trying to sponsor a whole bunch of shows, and they would make very sure that they include Skype into it, and they would always say it, and you just,
and it never fucking works.
It just never sounded right.
When people use Microsoft Surface on screen, I'm like, nobody uses this. I'm sorry, guys.
Oh, I know one person. One real person.
I don't. But yeah. Anyway, what else do we have to cover here?
Okay, we have the whole how the relationship develops. Again, we talked about the way that the kind of the makeout sessions and the sex scenes are interspersed, which works better than it does in and we always keep comparing this to the idea of because that's the episode we just did. And
but also it's movies. Nicholas Galitzine. They're both new movies. It makes sense to talk about this together because also the fans of these movies will be actually oddly similar group because of that actor. And I think that's interesting. So yeah, I mean, again, it ends in very utopian ways. They do come out, they're fine, they get to be together. Obviously, they have some conflict before. He wins
basically the presidential campaign for his mom because his ideas that were not accepted before, because they were blocked by somebody down the line, kind of get taken
so the book has a longer, intricate political storyline of there's this Republican other candidate that gets exposed as having had sexual misconduct, and that actually hurts his campaign.
Okay, you were saying it was a utopia.
Sorkin. But anyway, so there's a whole thing. But they win. He sort of wins the presidential campaign, and then obviously again, Stephen Fry, the king, comes in, and they actually come out and they have public support, and then they have that scene at the end where they go back to the house Alex grew up in Texas that he carries the key around for. And the unrealistic part about that is they would not be able to go there without a ton of the Secret Service. But my take is the Secret Service just hiding in the bushes.
They're just really good. That is literally what I thought as well. The Secret Service is just really good at placing themselves somewhere where you wouldn't see them in the shot.
But yeah, that's that, and it's. But yeah, I think it is a sort of realistic development of their relationship of sort of hitting some of the bumps, but overcoming them because they want to be together and dealing with some of the repercussions within a world where it can actually work out for them. And what I do is also the MVP, Sarah Shai's character, who is I cannot watch you mope anymore. I'm over you. I will call, as it turns out, the sort of personal bodyguard of Henry, because she has a thing with him, which is yes. And calls him, and then that's how they get in the same room again, and it's it's fine.
It's fine. It is again the few things that took me out of it I've already mentioned, and in the grand scheme of things, it's a fun rom-com, and it is a rom-com. Let's not. This is one where we can definitely say that. Where I was sitting and laughing at people falling into cakes, which I think in the history of movies is just the gold standard of funny physical comedy. If you do that,
well, you're fine. And it's fun. And I mean, again, the supporting cast also. So it's produced. I want to mention this. It's produced by Greg Berlanti, who is sort of also the godfather of doing white liberal gay TV. Aside from Ryan Murphy, but he's sort of the wholesome gay liberal, white liberal TV, versus Ryan Murphy being the raunchy and weird one with all the murder. aside from Glee, let's not talk about Glee. But Greg Berlanti did things like Everwood, and Brothers and Sisters, and then did a bunch of the DC kind of TV shows.
That's where I didn't know him from, which are also those. Very queer. Yeah.
But like Everwood wasn't, I think, had some queer, like, it was very early on where you could do that in sort of a CW setting, but it had some like guest stars at least. But he also started out working on Dawson's Creek, and I'm pretty sure starting out with the gay storylines in Dawson's Creek, right? So it does make sense that he would produce this, but I'm glad he handed sort of the directing and writing part over to, like, you know, actually gay Latino who might have a different sensibility of doing this, but also clearly reveling in the fact that he's not bound to CW standards of what, you know, greenlighting a thing that is way more explicit sexually than the CW.
Yeah, but it has that vibe. Like, this is the thing that I couldn't quite put my finger on. It certainly has that. Also kind of like the heightened, because like all of the CW shows have in common that they live in a heightened universe, right? All of the superhero shows in which things are still very much connected to the real world. Sometimes they also get preachy in cringy ways, which is very reminiscent of the scene of Uma Thurman having the talk with him.
Aaron Sorkin.
And Aaron Sorkin. Oh my God, now I want a CW show written by Aaron Sorkin, and I want to see how that looks. But yeah, no, that's kind of the vibe of that. And I think actually Berlanti did a whole lot for that, which unfortunately, because it was the CW, only a very specific group of people ever saw. It's not right out there. And it is a much better, like, and I'm going to probably get flack for this, the CW DC universe is a much more coherent and interesting place than anything they've ever put in the movies. Like,
DC movies are bullshit.
They are so bad.
We all knew this. They tried to be the next MCU and consistently failed. But then maybe also don't hire Zack Snyder, you know.
Yeah, I keep wondering though, like, if they had actually kind of gone the way that the TV versions went, which there are so many, and they keep making them. So something must be successful that they would have done better.
So I'm very pissed off actually at a review that is sort of a dialogue between two critics and Vulture, and they're clearly trying to be edgy and gay snarky, and I do appreciate people getting gay snarky, and I did laugh at It's a Tale as Old as slash fiction, but the thing is, my difference is they don't like that, I do. It's still true, and they call it, and I think this is getting at some of the like thing with the CW aspect, Disney Channel original gay porn.
It's not wrong.
But what really pissed me off about it is gay media comes out, pun intended, and immediately the whole queer community will pull it to shreds. And especially if it's the more wholesome... If
it's not the thing you want it to be.
Yeah, and it will never be the thing all of us want it to be anyway. But I think it's even more egregious if it's like 30, 40 something gays working for Vulture, like pulling this apart when it's like, you are not the fucking audience as well. Like, yes, you're consuming it because there's still so little gay media, but it's like, it is actually fine that Red, White, Royal, Blue is not All of Us Strangers, because yes, All of Us Strangers is an aesthetically cinematic masterpiece, but it's also depressing as hell. And, you know, like just, and people are also always shitting on like older queer scholars who work in queer media. I've heard criticize Heartstopper. I still haven't watched it to no end, but it's like, yes, but when you were 15, would you have not been happy that there are things like Red, White, Royal, Blue, and Heartstopper because it might have saved your life? Because I remember being 15 at a time where, yes, there were gay supporting characters, and I was fortunate enough to grow up in the 90s with a lot of like gay supporting characters in romantic comedies, as essentially, or things like The Birdcage. But there was hardly any queer teen media where the queers also got to be happy. And the fact that something like Red, White, Royal, Blue is out there, there's this like queer utopia fairy tale where they also get to have sex and you get told about having safe gay sex. That is unthinkable even 10 years ago. And sometimes I need to shake like people my age or older and say, it's like, take the fucking win. Stop pulling these things apart and trying to make Red, White, Royal, Blue the next, I don't know. Like,
I mean, the problem is that a lot of people, if you're still getting paid for journalism or for opinion, you're getting paid to be critical. And I think what we've kind of lost, and it's not always true, we've kind of lost in media criticism is the Roger Ebert model of like, I'm going to be critical of stuff I really don't like, and I have my reasons, and like I'm a weird, person who has seen way too many movies, so they're not always going to make sense to you. But also, I'm just going to say when I like something, and I don't care that it doesn't do this thing. I'm going to tell you that it doesn't do this thing. I'm going to tell you that it doesn't do this thing for this reason, and I'm still going to say, yeah, I like this in the end. Which is not to say that Roger Ebert is always right or was always right about things. Very clearly not.
The Roger Ebert page still exists, and I feel like the critics they have now are very much in that vein, because I did glance over the one for this film, and she was like, it's a fairy tale. If you go in understanding that, it's actually fun. Like, it's fine. Like, move on with your life.
It feels like a lot of cultural criticism looks at everything as if it is the same genre.
Yeah.
And the genre is the thing that I'm supposed to like. And that doesn't always work. And again, this is very clearly not made for me. And I have my issues with the way that it is made, and I cringe. But also, it's fine that there is media that I can also kind of, as a person who is not made for, casually enjoy. And for someone, this is going to be there when Harry Met Sally. It's perfectly fine that this is the way it is, and this is what we're.
Person this is their when Harry Met Sally for is probably a gay kid, and it's like, yeah. They don't have to read themselves into When Harry Met Sally anymore and like try to find kernels into straight romance when this is there. And it doesn't mean that reflects their whole life experience. It also doesn't reflect my life experience completely, because no, I'm not a man, and I'm also not the son of the president of the United States.
Wait, but this is news to me.
But the fact that there, again, is also a bisexual character that says he's bisexual is still groundbreaking even now. And yes, TV has moved on, but like I just literally finished an article yesterday about bisexual representation, whereas it's 25% of queer characters on current American television are bisexual, whereas the queer community is assumed to be 60% bisexual. And the characters are declining again. And there's the issue of people sort of also wanting to dodge labels, and it's just sort of unclear. It's still, again, and then in film, it's a whole other issue. Like, TV has been ahead of this for a while. But have a film out there where someone is like, hey, I'm bisexual, and their gay partner is like, that's cool, I don't care, is not the lived reality of most of us. Especially bisexual men. The bisexual male friends I have struggle with the fact that women don't accept them, and then some gay men don't accept them. And and again, this is where I'm like, queer community, I know you're being paid to be critical of shit, but even those of you who are not paid to be critical, you were suggest on social media, just like, take a seat, take the win. There's other queer media still. Nobody's taking it away from you. Not everything is Heartstopper, but like,
I also feel like, and again, I don't actually quite understand. Like my personal take is that Heartstopper is still a better love story than this. But that's neither here nor
I haven't watched it,
because again, like you get to enjoy what you watch, and you get to read into that what you want. The thing that I think this gets squeezed by from both sides is that on the one hand you have these older Gen X, older millennial people coming in and criticizing, like people who have read a lot of media theory and who have criticized a lot of things and like pointing out things, and then you have a younger generation coming in, which is also very critical of media in a different way. And what can happen is that a piece of media can kind of get caught in the fire, kind of in the firing line from both sides, and be completely trashed. And then you just kind of step back and you go like, what was this cultural moment that everybody complained about, this silly little movie which has become a cult classic, right? This is we're seeing that happen in real time.
To be fair, my bigger gripe with general media and journalism, and not about queer media specifically, is that most of it is now reading like Tumblr stand posts rather than actual criticism. But I think with the case of queer media, they're coming at it from both sides where exactly that is happening. Too much of it is too glorifying, and it's like, I love this thing, but like look at the media coverage for shows like Bridgerton as well, and they're very straight, and it's still like, oh my god, and like I ship this and I ship that, and it's like, no, sit down and write your review, Collider person. But like
put that on your Twitter if that's still anybody who still reads that.
And then but here it's like people also just want to be snarky about this thing. This may not be for them because they're no longer 18, and it's the whole thing. But actually, so like speaking of overall rating, so Rolling Stone had it's so bad it might be good, because it was that person was like, it's not a perfect cinematic masterpiece, but exactly the thing it is trying to do, it is actually doing well. It's trying to be a silly fairy tale gay rom-com, and actually it's good at that. And again, we can move on with our lives. And Rotten Tomatoes had the 76% critics, which is still very decent, but 93% audience.
Yeah, and IMDb has a 7.0 of 10, which for a rom-com is actually really on the high side.
Yeah. But yeah.
Which I think really the people who this is for and who get it will love it. Other people who this is not for will be annoyed by it and will turn it off. And there's a lot of people in between, like me, who watch this and go, oh yeah, this is an entry into a growing but still very small canon, and it's a decent one. It's not something that you turn off halfway through, which I have done with other rom-coms that are certainly not necessarily worse written or produced, but that just didn't grab me that much.
And they're actually doing a sequel now. I'm unclear if McQuiston is also writing a sequel book, because their next book is something else. It's possible. But I mean, they're definitely involved in it. But it's also not surprising that they announced the sequel, because it did very well for Amazon. It keeps doing very well. Whenever I open Prime, it pops up as the like most popular Prime productions, like Amazon original productions. Yeah. That and The Idea of You right now, which also had a lot of views. And also it got, despite people always needing to tear it apart, it got a GLAAD award, or like was nominated for like fan favorite, which is exactly what, it's not going to win an Oscar, but it, for good reason, will get a GLAAD award for being the fan favorite thing, and that is its audience.
If you're not gonna enjoy a queer rom-com set in an Aaron Sorkin universe, then don't watch it. That's not for you. That's also fine. But
we watch it once and complain, and then let it be, and like not come back to it. Because I also saw someone tweet, even elder millennial gay guy, I think, it's like, oh, dear God, watch another gay movie. And I'm like, I've watched a lot of other gay movies, but again, a lot of them are super depressing and serious because they deal with very serious issues, and I will teach them in my classrooms. Again, All of Us Strangers, in terms of speaking of like new releases, is super serious and super depressing. And then the other canon of gay film is exactly like, will probably be about the AIDS crisis or something. And that is exactly the problem we have. And I do not sit down and enjoy myself watching any of those films. I don't think I can stomach All of Us Strangers again, which is not about the AIDS crisis, and I will not spoil that film here now because I don't need to, but it's just super, super depressing. It's very well acted, it's well written, but it's really, really fucking depressing.
Yeah,
and I will not turn to that. Whereas Red, White, Royal Blue, if I'm like scrolling through things and I want to put something on that I've seen a couple times, it might enter my canon of like things I put on when I just want to put something on, which is like My Best Friend's Wedding, which we have to do because I've seen it 50 million times. But it might enter that sort of canon of like, throw it on, I will glance at the scenes I enjoy the most, I will not recognize, it is that kind of movie, and that's fine. Yeah.
Yeah. So we did the critics' take. We have definitely decided that this is a rom-com, which I don't think we need to separately redecide that.
There is obviously, again, no tagline, I think. I haven't looked at the poster. Sometimes they put one on the poster now, but I'm not sure. Do you have a fake tagline?
I don't really have a good fake tagline, but they all, like, my thoughts all hovered around kind of like the whole, like, Aaron Sorkin-ness of it, which is basically...
there is an actual one.
There is an actual tagline.
Love who you want. It's good foreign policy. Okay. Again, Aaron Sorkin, I guess. What was yours?
The West Wing, but gayer.
The West Wing should have been gayer. It's the only thing that
Aaron
would improve
Sorkin
the West
is probably
Wing.
the issue.
Yeah. Mine is, imagine a world where Uma Thurman is president.
Yeah,
that explains instead of Donald Trump.
I think between that we kind of covered the utopia of it all.
And I give it 5 out of 5 toppled wedding cakes.
I'm gonna subtract 1 cake for having toppled, and because of, I don't know, like the kind of not entirely age appropriate casting, not in terms of like that it kind of just was a little bit off. I will give it though 1 honorary Cary Grant Memorial Award for Taylor Zakar Perez, who really kills it in this, because I had not really. I looked at what he's done. I must have seen him in things before. I had not registered him.
No, he's not done anything. He's not done anything.
Not anything. I think he did,
he's done the 2 sequels to Kissing Booth, which is a Netflix teen rom-coms. He's not done anything, but they do agree that he like should be Cary Grant.
He's the breakout
Gregory
star from
Peck,
this
person, and I'm entirely sure he's commented on this. If the fact that he's actually queer breaks that career for him, I'm going to be very mad, because Nicholas Galitzine is having a career right now. Let's not get into the whole should straight people allowed to have gay roles? I do think they do. I also think it is a bad tendency to now basically force actors to comment on this and come out. Galitzine had to come out and say he's straight, and I don't know if he's taking away space, but it's also like, the reality of things is this could also change for these people along the way. He's now made a career out of playing a lot of gay people, but now he's also in the idea of you leave it be. In any case, I'm happy for both of them to have longer careers within this kind of rom-com genre, or also transition into other things. They're both fun actors, interesting actors to watch. So I do also hope that Taylor Zakar Perez gets more screen time soon.
Yeah. Do a kind of a politics spin-off of this. Yeah.
No, I'm sure. I mean, I guess he probably has to be handed a straight romance next to make it. Unfortunately, it's still the world we live in. Or like some gritty drama directed by whomever. It could be someone like Luca, what is his name? Guadagnino, who does all these actually explicitly queer films like Call Me By Your Name and Challengers now, that he could fall into. He's also just directed apparently a 3-hour-long movie literally called Queer, starring Daniel Craig. And I'm ready for Daniel Craig post-Bond to be gay again. Anyway, yeah. And also generally, I just want more queer rom-coms to come out, and I want them to be actually good. That is the other issue. So I'm very happy this exists.
All right. That is Red, White, and Royal Blue.